Alright, next thing I'm going to throw here is a cylinder for a mug. And I'm specifically saying that this is going to be a cylinder for a mug because I'm going to make the rim comfortable for the mouth. So I've got my clay on the wheel head. I'm going to get my hands nice and wet and I'm going to center the clay. Now this time I'm going to skip, I'm not going to cone it up, I'm going to skip that process so you can see what that looks like. So I'm going to press down on top of the clay. If your hand starts to stick, you see that what that looks like here. You also know what that feels like. You're going to want to get some extra water on there. So I'm going to press down on the clay, and then I'm going to, without switching hand positions, I'm going to switch which hand is working here. So now I'm going to push in with the side hand. Notice that my side hand is braced against my leg, or my stomach, or my splash pan, whatever's most comfortable. I'm going to get a little bit of this clay away from the bottom there. I could also use my wooden rib to scrape that off of there. Get it out of my way. So I've brought this up, I've brought this down. It's close to centered, it's not quite there. So I'm going to bring this back down again. And I can feel some wobble in there that's not really showing up as well, probably in the video. And so the more practice you have working with the clay, the more you're going to be able to feel what's going on with your hands without having to look at it and see what's going on. Until you figure that out, practice, take a look, analyze, ask questions, ask your neighbor, does this look like it's centered? Those sorts of things. Practice. Alright, so I am going to start a cylinder which has a flat floor with a piece of clay that's centered a little taller than it is wide. The base, how wide it is here when I begin will determine how wide the whole piece is going to be. So if I start it this wide, I'm going to have a cylinder based on this kind of shape. If I start it a little bit wider, I'm going to have a shorter, wider cylinder. If I start it a little bit narrower, taller, narrower cylinder. This is about where I want to be. I'm just not quite as centered as I want to be. We'll call that good. So I'm going to drill my hole in the center, same as I did before. Now in this case, drilling a hole for a cylinder, I'm not going to want to, or I can drill it a little bit deeper than with a bowl because I won't be trimming a foot on the bottom. That little bump that happens there, make sure you take care of that. Always compress your rim. I'm going to drill my fingers straight down into the bottom of this pot. I can measure the floor if I'm concerned about how thick that is. Get my water out of the inside, and I'll use a needle tool to measure the bottom. So I'm going to take my needle tool, and I'm going to poke the bottom until it touches the wheel head, and then I'm going to bring my finger down until it touches the inside of the clay. I'm going to grab onto the needle tool now and pull it out, and the distance from the tip of my needle tool to the tip of my finger is the thickness of my floor. I've got maybe 1/4 of an inch here, and so I should be fine. Don't want to go any deeper than that. Now I'm going to pull my wall out towards my palm. This time with the cylinder, I want a nice flat floor. If I'm doing a bowl, I want a curve. But with a cylinder, a nice flat floor. So I'm going to try to pull that wall straight out to my palm, while keeping that floor fairly flat. Now, I actually didn't do as nice of a job as I should have with keeping that floor flat, and that is okay. What I can do is I can get my rib in there, or I can even take my finger and I can compress some of that part that's a little taller to fill in that part that's a little lower. While you've got the piece this open this wide, it's a good idea to get the rib in there. A nice flat bottomed rib with a right angle on either side, one or the other sides, something that's narrow enough to fit in there. If you're working on a very narrow cylinder, you can use the end of a ruler, piece of wood, something like that, to get that floor nice and flat. But compressing that floor with a rib is a little bit better than just using your fingers because it makes that floor a little bit stronger. It compresses those clay particles. So I'm going to press that rib down into the floor, make that nice corner, and then lift it out of there. Now that floor is a little bit stronger, and so now I can ignore the floor essentially and work on the walls. So after I pulled up that wall, I did compress my rim to make sure it's nice and strong. I can use one finger when the wall's a little thick like this. When it gets a little thinner, I may want to hold that wall with my left hand while pushing with my right. I can also drag the rim over the sponge over that rim and compress that rim that way as well. So now I'm going to add a little bit of water, and I'm going to lean my body over the clay, and I'm going to compress that wall as I bring my fingers up. Now remember, your fingers are not moving around. You are not actually pulling that wall. You're compressing that wall while you move your fingers up it. Now I've still got a problem with my wedging today, at least on these last couple of pieces, and so I'm going to pop those bubbles. Pop those bubbles with my needle tool. Some of them were popping while I was throwing, but just to be sure that they're out of my way, I'll get them popped. So I'm going to bring my fingertips all the way to the bottom here. I'm really going to grab that clay on the outside and bring these fingers up together. I'm going to let up my pressure as I get to the top and gently take my fingers off. Compress my rim again. It's always a good idea to compress your rim. You also notice I didn't really pull until I got all the way to that rim. If you're talking or if you're taking a break, make sure you get the water out of that inside floor because we don't want that floor absorbing extra water. And now I can start to think about the shape that I want to do here. I've got a lot of throwing lines visible on the surface of my pot here. You can leave throwing lines. Those are a perfectly reasonable sort of thing to do. If you don't like the throwing lines or you don't want the throwing lines on this particular piece, you can use a rib to compress those throwing lines away. You can use a rib on the inside as well. It's a little bit trickier to get it into there. Remember, when you're using that rib, you're compressing the clay. You're scraping along that surface. You don't have it at quite a right angle. You've got a little bit closer of an angle like that. Now I've just simply got too much clay here for the shape that I'd like to do. So I'm going to use my needle tool parallel to the wheel head to cut some of this off of here. It's just more than I want to have. And now I'm going to compress my rim again. Remember, when you use that sponge, you're folding over, you're not pressing down, you're squeezing those sides. So you don't have a lot of downward pressure. Most of your pressure is from those two fingers at either side. If you're worried about things falling over, have your other fingers there to keep things steady. Now I've got a little bit more thickness at the bottom and I'd like to bring that up into the rest of my piece. Get some water on the inside so I don't stick. So I'm going to bring that up into here. And then I also want to do a little bit of shaping here so you can see a distinction where my rim is. Not necessary, you don't have to do that sort of thing, but that's the shape that I'd like to have on this particular piece. Getting my water out of the inside. I'm actually going to get my rib in one more time and just make sure my corner got a little bit soft from my finger pressing on it. So I'm going to compress that a little bit more. Get my water out of the inside again. And now I'm going to use the rib here to clean up that outside edge and do a little shaping as well. I'm going to use the back end of that rib to kind of accentuate that edge that I've got going there. I'm leaving the throwing lines a little bit visible on the inside, but I'm just choosing to have the outside be a little bit more smooth. So one other thing that I've done here is I've made my rim a little bit narrow. I'm going to grab my chamois and I'm going to just accentuate that. My chamois, just like my sponge, I'm going to hold at an angle and squeeze this edge. I'm sorry, I'm going to hold it over the edge and squeeze the sides. I guess I can't talk while I'm working. Now I'm going to use a slightly different tool to clean up this bottom edge. I'm going to use my blade. And that allows me to fairly quickly come in and just cut this stuff away. Kind of combines the step of cutting that clay and removing that clay. Alright, now I'm going to bring some water underneath here, grab my wire, pull this through, and I'm going to have this piece hydroplaning again for me.